So let's start there and take 5-10 minutes to talk about that. And then I'll come back and we'll talk about some specific issues about pipelines and subsidies and these kinds of easy questions.
Okay. Okay.
You can pull down your copy of Daniel Yergin's The Quest anytime you need to for.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, let me
Dan,
introduce you formally as well.
Do you think Dan would join?
I hope so. I hope all our friends. Did you get a message from Santiago Soldati?
Yes, I did.
Okay. He was asking me for your info. Good.
Yes, I did. Long time. I see that Decio is now at the AMP.
Well, he was until I think February.
Oh, February.
He stepped down. A couple.
What is him now?
He has the quarantine within the quarantine.
So it's not working really.
No, he's got a 6-month cooling off.
Was he infected?
No, I'm sorry. I meant in terms of the, they have the lockdown, the quarantine, but within the sort of work world, leaving the agency, he has a 6-month restriction. Yeah. And for those of you who are listening, that this will be part of my introduction, but Rene Ortiz was, for many years, a member of the board of directors of the Institute of the Americas, and as was Decio Done, and they coincided for several years, up until about 3 or 4 years ago, and Decio went back to government, and Rene on March 9th went back to government. So, but they coincided along with several other friends and colleagues across the hemisphere. We hope we're tuning in this morning. Well, I think everyone's, looks like people are joining. I see Milton Chavez. You probably remember Milton there. He's joined us online. We've got a bunch of people. The upside, Rene, to doing this, Mr. Minister, virtual is you don't have to travel to La Jolla, which I guess is also a downside. But we have got an enormous response, the amount of people participating because of the ability just to join online. So it's been an enormous response. Over 500 people have registered for the La Jolla conference online this year. So, but let me formally introduce you, Mr. Minister Rene Ortiz. You are the Minister of Energy and Non-Renewable Natural Resources of Ecuador. And as I mentioned, Rene spent several years as a director, a member of the board of directors of the Institute of the Americas. He has worked for, I'm not going to say how many years, he's worked for many years. He's a very, very experienced professional in the energy and the oil and gas sector. He has held just about every important job you could hold. He's been Secretary General of OPEC. He's been the Minister of Energy previously in Ecuador. He's been head of the Industry Association in Ecuador. He's held, like I said, various jobs in the industry. And on March 9th, because of this amazing experience and the need to, I would say, position Ecuador's energy sector and oil and gas sector as a central pillar of the economy, President Lenin Moreno appointed Rene Ortiz once again to be Minister of Energy. And it's interesting, Rene, this morning we had Armando Zamora on the line, and he was discussing, he's back at ANH in Colombia. He was appointed on March 10th. And you were appointed on March 9th, and I think just about the whole world locked down on March 13th.
That's it.
So you guys can compare some notes about immediately pivoting and running major government organizations and agencies remotely. And he made some very interesting comments about the pivot to remote working and just how productive they've been. So, well, look, that's the introduction. Why don't you share with us for a few minutes how you see the sector? You arrived in the moment of crisis. The crisis continued. There were some other layers in Ecuador that have been layered on top of the crisis. So you have crisis on top of crisis. Talk to us about COVID-19, oil market volatility, and just exactly what's going on and how Ecuador is going to recover and use energy to recover. Mr. Minister, over to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the introduction. And in fact, I'm so glad that, first of all, to see that Armando is back in government too. And it is important to make a remark on that, because it means that experience is back on board again. And I think Armando has a great deal of experience in the oil and gas industry of Colombia. And I am glad to share with you that, in fact, I have not returned to my office physically ever since I was appointed. So all my work, which is a 24/7 kind of a work, actually is from my residence in Quito. But anyway, I think that I would like to start pointing out the fact that the world, there is no record, historical record for the world to experience a triple storm, a combination of a triple storm, the shrinking of the entire economy of the world, the sanitary crisis with COVID and coronavirus. And in the middle of all this, the collapse of the oil market, with prices last 20th of April collapsing under the zero in the WTI futures market. What a combination. In fact, I think the world had never experienced such a type of combination. And I would say that the destruction on the planet is immense. Everything is being destroyed. Not only the economy, not only the markets, but the destruction on families, schools, employment, everything. The destruction is massive. So the reconstruction is much more difficult. And I like to repeat what I hear and learn from world highly prestigious individuals. I think back to normality is not going to be the same normality prior to all this crisis. Think of this kind of relationship with the Institute. We could never figure out that this could happen, but we're working. I have run the business of my ministry, which handles three major important sectors: the mining, the electricity, and the hydrocarbons, including oil and gas. And the economy of Ecuador is a dollarized economy. So these three major important sectors of Ecuador do support dollarization in Ecuador, because we are becoming industrial scale exporters of mine minerals. The production started just last quarter. Last quarter of 2019. But the first quarter of this 2020, Ecuador actually started to be a player in the mining world with a potential which calls for attention, because it is a huge potential that these mining companies are finding around the mountains of Ecuador, and mountains and valleys and rivers and lakes and everything else. They are finding them. In the electricity sector, we export electricity to Peru and to Colombia. And actually this coming quarter, we're going to increase our exports of electricity. And in the hydrocarbons, of course, in the oil sector, we have had that experience. Our production is probably averaging 500,000 barrels a day, a little bit more, a little bit less. But the three sectors, as you could see, are exporters and do support the dollarization of the economy of Ecuador. So our attention is quite critical to what happens with all these sectors. How do they develop? How do they keep their share in the market, in the world market? Because with all this shrinking of the economy, the map of the world was about this big. Predictions for 2020 were calling for predictions made in October 2019. They all saw that 2020 was the year of restarting the economy. I remember the words in some of the Davos meetings. The world economy is going to be revived and speed up a little bit because the other previous years were not so exciting. But this 2020 was seen as the year. And look what happened. What a shrinking. IEA says that probably the world will be consuming 30 million barrels less than what it was predicting. More than 100 million. But 30 million is a mound of barrels. How is the world economy going to absorb this amount of barrels? And then you add stocks, and producers have used stocks, even huge vessels, as stocks. There's a place to stockpile barrels. And there is no one single production country that had said publicly before the crisis, this entire 2020 crisis, that had not said, we are going to increase production, oil production. We had 60 people at the OPEC Plus meeting, 60 people connected, but all of them wanted to produce oil. But the economy cannot take it. It's amazing what is happening. So under this world scenario, to have a most small country like Ecuador with 500,000 barrels of production, facing another disruption in the middle of this crisis. Our exports were protected because we never paralyzed our exports, not minerals, neither electricity nor oil. But in the middle of this crisis, the three pipelines collapsed. The amount of rain was huge that flooded the rivers. You and I can agree that maybe the flow is twice as much. Yes, yesterday. No, it was 7 times. And there are registrations of 10 times the same volume of previous years. So it was immense, the amount of water, and they simply collapsed the system that was through these rivers. And it took about a month to fix them. All of them changed their routes. There are some variations because they cannot go through the same type of trajectory. But we're back in production. The last registration I have is about 425,000 barrels. And so we need another couple of weeks and probably we are back in the same level of production prior to this incident. But if you start adding all these incidents, world, local, how do we deal with the coronavirus in Ecuador? And dealing with the coronavirus meant to the people to apply discipline in their lives. Boy, discipline was so difficult to apply. Ecuador got contaminated because in one of the airline flies from Europe. He came an Ecuadorian back from Italy. And she contaminated the entire airplane. And when she landed in Ecuador, at the terminal, she was greeted by tens of family members, all of them hugging themselves. And then this person had breakfast, lunches, dinners, parties. The contamination was huge in the city of Guayaquil. She was the responsible person. She's no longer with us. She died. But she was the one that actually brought in it was easy for us to single out that this was the person that contaminated the city of Guayaquil and then spread it all. So the fight is being to contain, to confine, to cure. It's been very difficult. Very difficult for a country like Ecuador, because the lack of discipline of the people is the first thing we have to deal with. Confining them in their houses, in their residence, in their apartments was very difficult. Now we're moving into a different kind, distancing. And distancing is accompanied by the reactivation of the economy. So I'm telling the people, and everybody in our government is telling the people, and everybody in the industry is telling the people, is let's go back to work. But the sanitary protocols are different than in confinement. In the confinement, you are around your families. But here in distancing, this type of protocols are different. The sanitary protocols are different. So we'll see what happens. But we introduce sort of a light, like a traffic light, to sort of characterize each province. And this was theoretical, entirely conceptually. But when the time was ready for the application, every province turned red. Every province, the authorities, the local authorities of every province, they turned red. They said, we don't want any interaction with anybody. Oh my gosh. This is not the way that we're going to reactivate the economy, because the food chain, for instance, had to move from so quickly on the roads. The minerals have to be transported. I don't have a problem with the crude oil because you have pipelines, and so there's no interaction with the rest of the economy except that through the two ends of the pipelines. And the electricity is through cables, so no problem. But the mining had a problem because in some provinces they say, okay, stop mining. I say, you can't stop mining. These industrial scales cannot be stopped. They have to continue. So very difficult to make the people to understand. So the only lesson that I had after this that I could communicate to the mining sector was we have to improve the community relations. But the community relations have to be improved beginning with education, because we have to educate the people. The fear can to the business world community is we are reopening the country. But we are not just reopening to investments, to investors. We are demonopolizing entirely, particularly the energy sector. So in this process of demonopolization, the business opportunities are huge, truly huge. The response so far, fantastic, because the pandemic had not really stopped us of meeting with interesting companies, huge companies, very interesting, because there are some ongoing businesses that will have to be transferred to the private sector. Ongoing business. We cannot support it. The government the treasury is dry. So we can, simply we can. And if we want to expand, and we want to expand in these three fronts, mining, electricity, and in the hydrocarbons, we need the support of the private sector, the international private sector. We are welcoming them. And the meetings I had with them have been, I can share with you, very positive.
That's such a fascinating, I mean, so many pieces of the story there. And I do believe our mutual friend, Fernando Benalcázar, has rejoined the government to manage the critical mining portfolio, right? So please give him our regards, an old friend from the sector, well, from the energy, oil and gas sector.
Indeed.
So Rene,
I was able to bring him back.
You brought him back.
Highly good professional. I'm surrounded by really the best of the best.
Yeah, no, so best wishes to him. I think you've answered, but a couple of questions just to clarify. I want to get into just some of the exact ways you're incentivizing and some of the things you just finished talking about. Important, we've heard this from many of the other government officials in the last 2 days. There really, there's no manuals, there's no guidebook on how to manage through this crisis from a minister or from a regulator. So you're, as the saying goes, you're changing the oil on the car as you're flying down the freeway, right? So best wishes on that. The Treasury is dry. So I want to ask you about some of the fiscal and contractual incentives. But first, just to clarify about the pipelines, because as you noted, and I alluded to earlier, you all, on top of all of these international crises, you had a domestic local crisis due to the rains and the flooding of the outages of the pipelines. So do I hear you correctly that those have pretty much been normalized, the flows and the movement and transportation has been recovered? And then one clarification, we're getting some questions from the audience about whether there was any spillage, whether there's any remediation required. So just sort of clarify the capacity, if it's back, and then if there was any environmental issues associated with those outages.
Very good question. Let me start from the last part. In fact, we're back in production, fully. The pipelines have gone through all these tests, physical, chemical tests. Everything is working fine. The process of recovering the full production is moving. I mean, many, almost all of them, the fields were zero production. So restarting it is taking few days, but it's moving fast. I'm glad to tell that it's moving fast. We may be reaching our production, previously the pandemic, which was 535,000 barrels a day, in the next few days. We will. Number one, the spill. The reaction was immediate. And the systems of the pipelines were designed in such a way that the amount of crude oil that could be spilled on the river was very little. So the system, the valve system, immediately stopped us. But then it came the containment of this spill. And because this goes along with the rivers, and it was very interesting the way that it worked. It worked perfect. In other words, I can take this opportunity to congratulate our people because they reacted very well. And we have, fortunately, the technology with us. We had in stocks the piping, the valves. So it was just a perfect time for us also to resort not to the international business community, because it would have taken weeks and weeks because everybody was under this confinement. But it was, fortunately, everything was in place. The stocks were there, and we use them, and the pipeline system, the three, are already operating 100% fine. The remediation, because there are a number of communities and cities along the river. Perfect, because we were able to contain this. And the remediation is going very well. We are even cleaning each stone in the river. I have some videos which are really beautiful, because we're cleaning even the stones that are in the size of the banks of the river, and we are cleaning in those places and where the remediation is taking place. It was fine and it was good work, which we were able to maintain and contain and extract of all this spill. And it did not reach further down. We were able to check in the little towns nearby the border with Peru, and they had no traces of it. So it was good. The containment was good. It worked, and it worked perfect. Now the remediation, it worked. Now, we also have to come and assist the local communities. They have their own sources of water, drinkable water. But before we use them, we channel them with water on bottles, these huge tanks of water. So the population was quite well assisted in terms of their needs, and particularly water. Water was the most important issue for them, and we, through these remediation companies that worked well, we were able to supply them with enough water during this crisis. In addition, we are revamping all these water systems that they have by the river. So they will have a better water system after this crisis.
Thank you, and I think we could probably talk about those kinds of issues for a long time, but I wanted to get, before we run out of time, and I don't want to take too much, even if you are working remotely. I know you said you're working 24/7, so don't let me keep you from too much, but there are two key parts of this conversation I'd like to have today. So two more major questions. One, you talked about all your efforts to continue to make Ecuador a destination for private investment. Talked about efforts in demonopolizing the sector. What specifically, in terms of contracts, model contracts, some of the bid rounds that have been put on hold? I guess let me summarize this question by this way, Rene. What are the changes and adjustments that you all are leading and making in terms of fiscal and contract terms to indeed land that investment? And we talked about A&H in Colombia. You're competing for what's increasingly restricted capital. I mean, we've heard all the numbers of capex reductions. So what are you doing as minister in Ecuador to incentivize and land those investors?
Changing the ruling, changing the regulations, changing the legislation to attract the private sector to participate in this revamping of the economy. And this is going through. But in addition, for instance, the downstream, the entire downstream is going to be under concession to the private sector. I have issued the proper legislation for free import of fuels for the local consumption. What is the meaning of free import of fuels? It is very crucial to our country because at the moment, the government is financing Petroecuador for all these imports. If the private sector comes in and takes this role, then the government will have less problems with this dry treasury. It is just like that. So it is already in place, the legal framework. a legal framework. Now is the challenge for every actor, and I have talked with many of them, and even the local companies, marketing companies of fuels in Ecuador. They're very interested in participating in this idea of becoming new providers of fuels from the international market. Since yesterday and today, you have in all these gas stations the new prices of fuels. We no longer have subsidies because actually subsidies were killed by the downfall of the prices. So we really didn't have to bring to the attention of the people that there are no subsidies at all. It's the market that worked, and it worked well. But now we are liberalizing the entire system. We are liberalizing imports. But the importers, the new actors, companies or individuals, entrepreneurs, they will have to use the infrastructure, which is owned by Petroecuador. So by next day, we will have a new system of leasing all the infrastructure of Petroecuador, making them feasible for the private sector to use them and pay for it. So Petroecuador will be able to use their infrastructure with the private sector as an end user over this infrastructure that has Petroecuador. So we are putting in place things that can lead the private sector to really take advantage of this new business that is developing for them in the internal downstream and midstream of Ecuador. But in addition, we are going to lease also, to concession, the refinery of Esmeraldas, for example, to the private sector. And they will upgrade and they will introduce high conversion units, whatever they need to, in order to have the products that have better value than the bottom of the barrel. So all this is going to be in the hands of the private sector. By the end of this 2020, probably 3 major centers of industrial installations will be handled by the private sector. International companies that are interested in investing here in Ecuador. Now, in the upstream, the same. We need to change the regulation and the legal framework, because in the past, regretfully, it was introduced a number of contractual modalities that were not attractive to the private sector. I think the production sharing contract is the best contractual modality. It had proved to be the best and the most attractive for the investors. But more than that, it's important that I can offer the current companies that are still in the country, small, medium, a little bit medium plus size companies, with an incentive. If you transfer your modality, if you take advantage of this transformation of your contractual modality from services to production sharing, you have a great advantage, is that you can actually use the property of the crude oil that you own. Because under the current modality, the crude oil is not their property. They're just servicing. But that's a disadvantage to the company and to the investors. So to come back to the production sharing modality is truly, truly good opportunity for the international investment community to look at Ecuador back. And we have another sectors, another sections, zones, areas in Ecuador which have not been fully explored. The geological province of Ecuador has a great potential still in the hydrocarbons industry, particularly in the oil industry. So the legislation is going to be in place. Some of it is already in place. Some of it will come in the next few days, because one expression I had with the president, I share with the president is, look, I'm running in a two avenues. One is the conjunction, and I'm just a fireman in the conjunction. But the other one is the important. And the important is the participation of the private sector entirely in the country's energy, mining, and electricity. Electricity too. And remember, I just mentioned that we are exporting electricity to Colombia and Peru. So electricity is also important for the investor to look at it, the opportunities that will be open for them. Okay, thank you.
I tell you what, I wanted to ask you about subsidies. I wanted to ask you what the plan was. I think you alluded to that a little bit. Very, very interesting. So next few days, production sharing agreements, that's the new modality, liberalizing the downstream, midstream. So let me ask you, where does it stand with the merger of the two national oil companies, Petroamazonas and Petroecuador? I know when we were in Quito last year for our event, that was one of the discussion topics. In fact, I think you were chairing that panel with our friend there who was managing that for the ministry. Just real quickly, and then I want you to end with a little bit of a thought on renewables, and I'll let you go.
Okay. Let me first start with renewables, because it is important. The government is really concerned, and I am also concerned. But we're looking renewables to concentrate and push them at the Galapagos Islands. So we're going to remove all the fossil fuels supplies, possibly in the Galapagos Islands. All of them will be renewables. There's already moving projects in the photovoltaic and also in the wind power. The wind power was the first. As a matter of fact, it started with my ministry back the last time. We really make it possible for the first turbines to be installed, wind power turbines to be installed in the Galapagos Islands. Now, there are coming much more investors, private sector, by the way, private sector. So the renewables are already only in the private sector, and we are really pushing them to go ahead. There are many other places where renewables are going to be a good source of energy. And not only photovoltaic, we will take also the wind power. So it is moving quite well. Now, for the country, and a small country like Ecuador, the potential of natural resources is really immense. And we have not really done much about it, because I think the monopolization of this, what they call strategic sectors, they're no longer strategic sectors. Those are investment sectors. I treat them like that. So the way I promoted this country with this new demonopolization process that is coming is look at for the opportunities. First, on the ongoing businesses, because there are ongoing businesses, but on the grassroots businesses too. Well, I hope I did answer some of your questions, and of course of colleagues and friends in the audience that have been connected. I reiterate to them that Ecuador is welcoming in this reactivation process to take advantage of this new legal framework for private sector business opportunities.
Your message has been loud and clear. Ecuador is open for business. It's energy and mining and electricity are critical to the recovery. Like you said, given the dollarization, Ecuador found itself in an even more unique position. It must incentivize and attract that foreign investment. The treasury is dry. I think you said that 3 times. Point very well taken. So we hope to help see that investment, and I know there's a lot of people joining us today who are investors interested in investing, and hopefully they will all knock on your door very soon, Rene, Mr. Minister. And we'll look forward to seeing you here for an update next year, May 2021 in La Jolla. And look, thank you very much. This has been fantastic. We appreciate your time. Best wishes. Un abrazo.
Thank you. Muchas gracias.
Hasta pronto, amigo.